At 6:17 hours on 14 October 1944, Corporal Michael Ruiz lies motionless inside an abandoned hunting blind on the western slope of the Vosges Mountains. The temperature is 19 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that breath fogs and lingers, cold enough that pine sap has frozen into amber beads along the splintered boards above his head. The blind, once used by French hunters stalking red deer, lanes slightly downhill at a 7-degree pitch, its rear wall collapsed inward, patched with burlap and evergreen branches cut the night before. Snow fell 2 days ago. Now it is crusted, hard as broken porcelain, and every careless step below will sound like a rifle crack. Ruiz has been awake since 03:40. He has not moved in 47 minutes. The weapon rests across his knees, angled through a narrow firing slit hacked into the blind's front plank. It is heavier than regulation, longer than doctrine allows, wrapped in canvas, wire, and a length of bicycle inner tube that still smells faintly of rubber and oil. The steel presses cold through his gloves, leaching heat from his palms. He welcomes the pain, it keeps him present. Below him, 312 yards downslope, the forest thins into a shallow saddle. A logging track cuts east to west, partially obscured by fallen fir limbs and a dusting of snow. That track is why he is here. At 6:19 the first sound reaches him, leather creaking. Not boots yet, just the slow complaint of straps under weight, then voices, low, educated, confident, German. The patrol emerges in pieces, not as a line but as a shape. 10 officers, field gray coats clean, collars turned up against the cold. Their escorts fan out automatically, rifles low, muzzles angled down, boots careful but unhurried. These are not men who expect trouble. These are men who expect reports. One officer stops and raises binoculars. The glass flashes once, a brief, fatal wink of reflected dawn. Ruiz counts without moving his lips. 10 officers, 12 escorts, 22 men total. High Command Observation Patrol, the kind that redraws maps and shifts artillery arcs with a pencil stroke. If they complete their circuit, the American line 2 miles south will be bracketed by noon. The odds are not theoretical. Ruiz has seen the result. He smells cordite on the wind, carried from a battery firing somewhere far to the east. Diesel smoke clings low to the ground, sweet and oily. Under it all is the scent of wet wool and unwashed men drifting uphill. Inside the blind, time compresses. His fingers are numb now, joints stiff, but the pressure of the stock against his shoulder is familiar. The weapon does not sit like an army rifle, it never has. At Bennying, an officer laughed when Ruiz laid it out on a table. Another shook his head and said, "That's not how snipers work, Corporal." The armorer called it unnecessary. Top-heavy, impractical. Ruiz said nothing then, he says nothing now. At 6:23 the patrol halts. An officer points to the valley floor and speaks for 12 seconds. Ruiz watches his mouth form the words. He cannot hear them clearly, but he doesn't need to. He knows what is being said. Grid references, ranges, adjustments. He shifts his weight by less than an inch. The blind answers with a soft, treacherous creak. Ruiz freezes. His breath stops halfway out. Below, one of the escorts pauses, head cocked. A hand tightens on a rifle sling. 7 seconds pass. The man relaxes. Ruiz exhales slowly through his nose, counting heartbeats. He adjusts the forward support, an improvised rest bolted into the blind's frame until the weapon settles. The wind is light, 3 miles per hour, quartering left to right. He calculates the drift automatically. He has done this 100 times in his head, lying awake in foxholes, listening to other men die. Through the optic, faces resolve, rank insignia. A major's oak leaves, a colonel's eagle. This is not a skirmish target. This is a nerve cluster. Doctrine says this should not work. Doctrine says one man cannot disrupt a command link like this. Doctrine says the weapon he is holding is a mistake. Ruiz presses his cheek into the stock. The cold burns. His finger takes up slack on the trigger. The world narrows to a circle of glass and breath. At 6:27 the lead officer steps exactly where Ruiz knew he would. The pressure increases. In the next 40 minutes, one ignored corporal, one mocked weapon, and one frozen hillside will fracture an entire command chain. Michael Ruiz is born on 3 February 1919 in a 2-room railroad flat on the south side of San Antonio, 3 blocks from the switching yards. The windows rattle day and night as freight cars couple and uncouple. By the time he is 6 years old, he can tell the weight of a train by the sound it makes rolling over iron. His father, Luis Ruiz, works maintenance for the Southern Pacific Line, ballast, ties, winter repairs when fingers crack and bleed. His mother, Elena, sews sleeves onto uniforms at a garment plant near the river. In 1929, when the Depression reaches Texas in full, Luis's hours are cut to 4 days a week. Rent is $18 a month. Food is beans, rice, and whatever meat can be had cheap at the end of the day. Michael learns early that tools matter. A hammer that slips costs skin. A misaligned wrench rounds a bolt and wastes time. At age 12, he is already repairing his father's boots, stitching leather with waxed thread, pulling nails straight instead of throwing them away. Nothing is wasted, nothing is done twice if it can be done once correctly. At 14, he leaves school and takes a job as a machinist's helper at a small tool and die shop off Commerce Street. The shop floor smells of cutting oil and hot steel. His first year is sweeping chips and deburring parts, but he watches everything. By 1936, he is running a lathe under supervision. By 1939, he is trusted to hold tolerances within 0.02 of an inch. He learns how metal behaves under stress, how vibration creeps into long pieces, how balance matters more than brute force, how weight placed wrong will fight you every time. He works there 6 years, 6 winters, 6 summers where the shop hits 104 degrees Fahrenheit by noon and sweat runs into his eyes. He learns patience. He learns to feel when a tool is wrong before it fails. On weekends, he hunts not for sport but for meat. A battered .30-30 Winchester bought used, its bluing worn thin. He reloads spent casings by hand, powder measured with a borrowed scale. Shots are taken from fence posts, truck hoods, tree limbs, never from benches. He learns what happens when breath is rushed. He learns how recoil shifts a sight picture if you let it. On 7 December 1941, Michael Ruiz hears the news on a radio mounted above the shop office. The announcer's voice cracks as he repeats the words, "Pearl Harbor, attacked, battleships burning." No one cheers. No one speaks for nearly a minute. At lunch, Ruiz folds his sandwich back into its paper. He finishes his shift. That night, he tells his parents he will enlist. His father nods once. His mother says nothing, just tightens the stitching on the sleeve she's working. He reports for induction on 12 January 1942 at Fort Sam Houston. The physical lists him at 5 feet 8 inches, 162 pounds, eyesight 20/20. No medals, no college, just calloused hands. Basic training sends him to Fort Benning, infantry. He shoots well, 238 out of 250 on qualification, but not well enough to draw attention. What draws attention is what he does afterward. He adjusts his sling, adds padding, shifts the way the rifle rests against bone instead of muscle. An NCO notices. "Why you doing that, Ruiz?" "Fits better, Sergeant." An officer overhears. "Put it back the way it's issued." Ruiz does. When the officer leaves, he quietly moves it again. He is not a talker. He does not explain. He just performs. In late 1943, he ships out with the 36th Infantry Division. Embarkation from New York Harbor aboard the transport USS Wakefield. The Atlantic crossing takes 12 days, seasickness, diesel fumes, men sleeping in shifts. Ruiz spends hours on deck watching how the ship's vibration changes with speed, how resonance travels through steel. They land in North Africa first, then Italy. Combat comes in pieces, mortar fire, night patrols. Men whose names he learns and then forgets because they don't last long enough. By the time the division reaches France in September 1944, Ruiz is a corporal, squad leader when the sergeant is down. He has lost weight. His hands shake slightly when cold, steady when it matters. In the Vosges, the problem becomes obvious within days. Dense forest, limited visibility, German observation patrols moving freely along ridgelines. Artillery falling with impossible accuracy. They lose Private First Class Henry Kowalski, age 22, from Toledo, Ohio, on 2 October. A shell lands square in a foxhole that should have been safe. They lose Private Samuel Ortiz, 19, from El Paso 3 days later. Machine gun fire adjusted perfectly after a patrol passes unseen. Ruiz watches the pattern form. He goes to a lieutenant with a suggestion. A longer-range interdiction, a modified firing position. The lieutenant listens for 30 seconds. "We don't have time for experiments, Corporal." He tries again with the company commander, draws a rough diagram in the dirt. Explains angles, mentions his civilian work. The captain exhales. "Snipers don't work that way." So Ruiz stops asking. At night he scavenges, extra steel from a damaged machine gun mount, canvas, wire. He builds quietly inside abandoned structures, inside shell holes. Other enlisted men watch, some laugh, some help without asking why. By 10 October, he has assembled what doctrine says is unnecessary and what reality demands. When the patrol comes 4 days later, he is already waiting. He does not think of himself as special. He thinks only of tolerances, of angles, of doing the job once correctly. And when the weapon finally speaks, it will not sound like a mistake. By October 1944, the problem facing the American infantry in the Vosges Mountains is not courage, and it is not firepower. It is blindness. Doctrine says the infantry advances by frontage, platoons secure ground, artillery responds to observed fire. Snipers, where they exist at all, are hunters of opportunity, engaging exposed targets inside a few hundred yards, harassing movement, thinning the line. The manuals assume visibility. They assume fields, hedgerows, villages. The Vosges offer none of that. Here the forest closes in at 30 yards. Fir and pine rise straight and dense, trunks spaced just far enough apart to break lines of sight without blocking movement. The ground climbs and falls in sharp, uneven folds, 400 to 700 feet of elevation change compressed into narrow ridgelines. Sound behaves strangely. A rifle crack carries for miles in one direction and dies completely in another. Artillery flashes are never seen, only felt. German units understand this terrain intimately. Their doctrine adapts. Small, mobile observation patrols move along logging tracks and animal trails, climbing to vantage points where valleys open briefly like wounds. They observe, they mark, they withdraw. Within minutes, coordinates are relayed. Within hours, shells begin to fall with surgical precision. For the men of the 36th Infantry Division, it becomes a pattern. Foxholes that should be safe are not. Covered routes are bracketed without warning. Machine gun fire appears from angles that maps do not account for, and the casualties follow. On 2 October 1944 at 14:11 hours, a German 105 howitzer round lands directly inside a shallow foxhole on Hill 617. Private First Class Henry Kowalski, age 22, from Toledo, Ohio, is killed instantly. He has been in France for 9 days. His last letter home is still folded in his breast pocket, never mailed. 2 days later, on 4 October, Private Samuel Ortiz, 19, from El Paso, Texas, is hit crossing a narrow draw that had been used all morning without incident. A German MG-42 opens fire from 220 yards, adjusted with impossible speed. Ortiz takes 3 rounds in the chest. He is dead before the medic reaches him. On 6 October, during a company repositioning at dusk, Staff Sergeant Robert McLean, 31, from Boone County, Missouri, is wounded by shrapnel when artillery walks across the tree line in perfect increments, 20 meters per adjustment. McLean bleeds out behind cover because medics cannot move without drawing fire. In 72 hours, the company loses 9 men killed and 17 wounded. That is a 38% increase over losses in the previous sector. No German assault follows, no counterattack, just observation, correction, destruction. Corporal Michael Ruiz watches the pattern harden. He notices that the shelling always begins 30 to 40 minutes after certain movements. That machine gun fire arrives not randomly, but from prepared angles. That German patrols are seen briefly, then vanish, always uphill. The war, he realizes, is being decided by men who are not firing rifles. The crystallizing moment comes on 8 October, just after 09:00. A replacement, Private Daniel Weiss, 18, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, is crouched beside Ruiz, sharing a cigarette behind a fallen log. Weiss has been in the line for 6 hours. He is asking where the nearest town might be, whether there will be houses, whether this forest ever ends. Ruiz hears the shell before he hears the impact, a rising whistle, sharp and wrong. He shoves Weiss instinctively, but there is nowhere to go. The round lands 15 feet upslope. Fragmentation tears through bark and flesh alike. When the sound clears, Weiss is on his back, eyes open, blood pumping dark and fast into the leaves. Ruiz presses down with both hands, feels warmth soak through his gloves, smells iron and cordite mixed with crushed pine needles. Weiss tries to speak once, then he doesn't. The shelling stops after 3 rounds, it always does. Ruiz sits there for a full minute afterward, hands shaking not from fear but from calculation. This was not chance, this was correction. Somewhere above them someone watched, noted, adjusted. That night, Ruiz goes to his platoon lieutenant. He explains it simply: observation patrols, command elements, long-range interdiction. He sketches a firing position that violates every diagram in the field manual. The lieutenant listens, jaw tight. "That's not how snipers are used, Corporal." "They're not being used at all," Ruiz answers. The lieutenant exhales. "We don't have authorization for this, and we don't have time." 2 days later, Ruiz tries again, this time with the company commander. He brings numbers, timings, distances paced out and written on a scrap of map backing. He mentions his civilian background only once, quietly. The captain barely looks at the paper. "We're infantry," he says. "We hold ground, artillery handles the rest." "What if artillery can't see them?" Ruiz asks. The captain's tone hardens. "Stick to your lane. If you start freelancing and it goes wrong, you won't just answer to me." The message is clear: innovation is risk. Risk is unacceptable. Better to absorb losses than to create precedent. Ruiz leaves without saluting him properly, without protest. He understands the logic, he just rejects it. That night he inventories what he has: a damaged machine gun mount scavenged from a wrecked half-track. Extra steel plates bent but serviceable, canvas from a torn shelter half, wire, an old French hunting blind marked on a map, abandoned since 1940. He measures angles by memory, elevation, likely patrol routes. Wind patterns that repeat every morning between 600 and 800. He does not ask permission. Over the next 48 hours he works in pieces, always at night, always under cover. The weapon takes shape slowly, not as an invention but as an adaptation. Weight redistributed, stability increased, recoil redirected into structure instead of muscle. It is ugly, unofficial, effective. Other enlisted men notice. They do not interfere. One brings extra wire. Another stands watch without being asked. No one speaks of it to officers. By 12 October, word comes down. German patrol activity expected along the western ridgeline. High-ranking observers confirmed. Artillery units on standby. Ruiz finishes the final adjustment at 1:20 on 14 October. He tightens the last bolt until the vibration feels right, dead, absorbed, controlled. He tests the movement once slowly, feeling the resistance. It holds. He understands the consequences fully. If he is wrong, nothing changes. Men die anyway. If he is right, doctrine will still not change, at least not officially. There will be no citation for unauthorized equipment, no mention in after-action reports, perhaps a quiet nod, perhaps nothing at all, but the patrol will not complete its route, and somewhere down the line, artillery will fall blind. Ruiz packs up before dawn and moves uphill alone. He does not feel brave, he feels precise. The problem has been identified. The solution will not be approved, so he will apply it anyway. By 1:20 hours on 14 October 1944, Corporal Michael Ruiz has finished tightening the final bolt by feel alone. He does not use a wrench. He learned years ago that metal speaks more clearly through fingertips than tools. Too tight and vibration returns, too loose and the whole structure breathes under recoil. This one is right. The rifle at the heart of it is a standard M1903A4 Springfield. 30.06 caliber, barrel length 24 inches, but little else about the configuration resembles regulation issue. With mount, dampening assembly and support frame, the system weighs 38 pounds, nearly double what doctrine considers acceptable for a sniper. The added mass is deliberate. Weight absorbs energy. Energy mismanaged becomes movement. Movement becomes error. The recoil path has been redirected through salvaged steel taken from a destroyed M1917 machine gun mount, bolted into a triangular brace anchored directly into the hunting blind's floor joists. Canvas strips soaked in oil and wrapped tight around contact points deaden vibration. A length of rubber inner tube, cut, layered, compressed, sits between steel and wood, bleeding force into structure instead of bone. The firing arc is limited, 12 degrees horizontal, 6 degrees vertical. Enough. The position is not meant to chase targets. Targets must come to it. This is why officers laughed when they saw earlier versions. Too heavy, too fixed. Too deliberate. Infantry doctrine values movement. Ruiz values control. He tests the traverse once slowly. The motion is smooth, no chatter, no bounce. Satisfied, he disassembles the upper components and wraps them in canvas. At 2:05 he shoulders the load and begins the climb uphill, moving by memory, counting steps, avoiding trails. The forest is black and wet. The air smells of frost and sap. Somewhere to the east, artillery flashes briefly, painting clouds orange. By 03:40, he is inside the abandoned hunting blind. It takes him 27 minutes to reassemble the system in silence. Each piece goes where it belongs, each bolt turned exactly as much as it needs. The blind creaks once softly when he seats the forward brace. He freezes until the forest forgets the sound. At 04:19, he settles in. The blind faces downslope toward a shallow saddle used by German patrols to observe American positions without exposing themselves to return fire. Distance to the track varies from 287 to 335 yards depending on where the patrol halts. Elevation advantage, 62 feet. Wind at this hour is typically light and consistent, flowing upslope as the valley warms. He waits. By 6:00, the sky has begun to pale. Ruiz adjusts his gloves, flexing fingers to keep blood moving. He smells oil, old wood, the faint, ever-present tang of cordite drifting from somewhere unseen. He does not think of men, he thinks of numbers. At 6:17, the patrol enters the forest edge. They move as expected, officers in the center, escorts loose on the flanks, no helmets removed, no haste. These are men who believe they are unseen. Ruiz brings the optic up slowly. The glass is cold enough to sting his cheek. The sight picture resolves cleanly. The mount holds, no tremor, no sway. Wind 3 miles per hour, quartering left to right. Temperature 19 degrees F. Air density slightly higher than standard. He adjusts elevation by memory, not clicks. He learned long ago that knobs lie, experience doesn't. At 6:24, the patrol halts in the saddle. The senior officer steps forward. Ruiz identifies him immediately by posture alone. Confidence shows itself in how a man stands still. The officer raises binoculars. The lenses catch the morning light. Ruiz does not rush. At 6:27. His breath leaves his lungs and does not return. The trigger breaks clean. The rifle does not jump. The recoil flows backward and down into the blind's frame, into earth and timber. The sound is sharp but contained, snapping once and then vanishing into trees. The officer drops without drama, knees buckling, binoculars striking his chest as he falls. There is a pause of 1.5 seconds where no one understands what has happened. Then confusion erupts, shouts. A hand signals down. Escorts spread, rifles up, searching instinctively for a shooter that doctrine says must be closer. Ruiz cycles the bolt smoothly. The spent casing ejects, clinking once against steel before dropping into a canvas catch. At 6:27:18, he fires again. Second target. Another officer, this one turning to issue an order. The bullet takes him high in the torso. He spins and collapses against a tree, sliding down bark stripped raw by impact. Now the patrol scatters improperly. This is what Ruiz expected. At 6:27:31, he engages an escort who has begun running uphill. Wrong instinct, but a common one. The man drops mid-stride, rifle flying from his hands. Return fire begins, wild and unfocused. Rounds snap through branches far below the blind. The Germans are shooting at shadows, at sound, not at position. Ruiz is already adjusting. At 6:27:52, another officer falls, then another. He spaces shots 7 to 10 seconds apart, enough to prevent triangulation, enough to let confusion ferment. Each shot is deliberate. Each recoil impulse feels identical. The system behaves as built. At 6:28, the patrol attempts to withdraw downslope. Ruiz tracks movement only when it intersects it. The first sign that something has changed does not come from headquarters. It comes from silence. On the morning of 15 October 1944, artillery does not fall where it should. No shells walk methodically across the American tree line. No machine gun fire snaps into place moments after a platoon shifts position. For the first time in weeks, men move along a forest path in daylight and nothing answers them. Forward observers notice it first, though they don't understand it. Their radios remain quiet, coordinates go unanswered. The German batteries that had been so precise, so punctual, are suddenly hesitant. When they do fire, the rounds land wide, 50 meters off, then 70. Corrections come slowly, if at all. Within 24 hours, the pattern is undeniable. German observation patrols have vanished from the western ridgeline of the Vosges Mountains. American infantrymen notice before officers do. Men who have learned to flinch at every snapped twig now stand a little taller. Helmets come off briefly during halts. Cigarettes are lit without cupped hands. Someone jokes quietly that maybe the Germans finally ran out of shells. They haven't. They have run out of eyes. In the 72 hours following the engagement on 14 October, artillery-related casualties in the sector dropped by over 60%. Movement that once required smoke cover now happens openly. Supply runners complete trips without being bracketed by fire. Medics reach wounded without being pinned down. Nothing has changed on the maps. Everything has changed on the ground. There is no formal report explaining why. At battalion level, officers sense a shift but cannot point to a cause. Patrol logs show fewer enemy sightings. Intercepted radio traffic is thinner, less confident. Someone suggests the Germans may be repositioning. Someone else says it won't last. No investigation is launched. There are reasons for that. The U.S. Army in 1944 does not reward unauthorized success. It tolerates it sometimes, but it does not document it. Corporal Michael Ruiz never filed a report. No officer observed the engagement. No official sniper detachment claimed the action. To acknowledge what happened would require acknowledging how it happened, and that would invite questions no one wants to answer. Why was an enlisted man modifying weapons without approval? Why was a fixed position interdiction conducted without orders? Why did it work? So the silence remains. Ruiz returns to his squad the morning after the engagement with mud on his boots and less gear than he left with. No one asks where he has been. One man nods. Another hands him a canteen without a word. That is the extent of the recognition. The Germans, however, are not confused for long. Within days, their behavior changes. When patrols do resume, they move differently. Officers no longer cluster. Routes shift unpredictably. Observation points are occupied briefly, then abandoned. Binoculars are raised and lowered quickly. Men crawl where they once stood. Most tellingly, officers stop coming forward. Decisions that once happened near the line are pushed back. Orders take longer to arrive. Artillery fire becomes cautious, delayed by verification that never quite satisfies. From the American perspective, it feels like momentum. From the German perspective, it is caution born of loss. No German record names the cause. No diary entry explains why an entire command observation element ceased operating along that ridgeline. Losses are absorbed, reclassified, forgotten in the churn of a collapsing front. The war moves on. The Vosges are cleared sector by sector. Winter presses in, snow deepens. Ruiz repeats his technique twice more in different locations, always selectively, always without orders. Others imitate pieces of it, heavier rests, longer holds, better camouflage, but never the whole system. No one else has his patience for fixed positions. No one else has his tolerance for waiting. By November, the front has shifted east. By December, attention is elsewhere. Ruiz never receives a commendation. He is never reprimanded. His service record shows nothing unusual. He remains a corporal until the end of the war, promoted only when vacancies force it. This is not an accident. Recognition would require explanation. Explanation would require doctrine to bend. Doctrine in wartime bends slowly, if at all. When Germany surrenders in May 1945, Ruiz is in southern Germany, assigned to occupation duties that involve little more than standing watch and counting trucks. He does his job as he always has, precisely, without comment. He ships home in August, passing again through New York Harbor, this time without fanfare. There is no parade waiting for him. Just a train ticket and a folded set of orders. He returns to San Antonio thinner than when he left, older in ways that do not show. He goes back to the same tool and die shop on Commerce Street. The machines are louder than he remembers. His hands still know what to do. He works there for 27 more years. He marries. He raises children. He never speaks in detail about the war. When asked, he says only that it was cold and that it ended. The rifle is never mentioned. What Ruiz did in the Vosges does not enter official history. It does not appear in manuals or lectures, and yet, quietly, the lesson persists. In later conflicts, observation interdiction becomes an accepted priority. Command elements learn to disperse. Fixed sniper positions, once dismissed, are reconsidered under certain conditions. Recoil management, stability, repeatability. These concepts find their way into design rooms and training courses without footnotes. No one credits Ruiz. They don't need to. History is not only shaped by what is recorded, it is shaped by what works and is therefore repeated. The story of Corporal Michael Ruiz is not one of heroics.